All right, friends. Hello. My name is Reverend Dr. Jonathan Page, and I am the director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership here at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar about best practices for pastoral transitions. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. I'm really grateful to be joined on this webinar by all of you who are attending, but specifically my two teammates from the Lewis Center, Matt Lyons and Grace Rogers. So Matt is kind of anchoring our chat space. So if you have any questions that come up as we go through today's webinar, Matt will be able to answer those. Grace is helping with some logistics, and they're here to support, and I'm really grateful for them. A couple of things just for you to know as we're getting started. This Zoom is being recorded, and so if you need, to step out, if you need a bio break or just get tired of listening to me, you can always come back and see the recording later on. The other thing I want to make sure you know is that if you end up having a question about the content, we are going to have some space for Q&A at the end of this time. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat. I'm probably not going to respond to those live, but we will get to as many of those as we can at the end of our time, and we will wrap up right at 1 o'clock Eastern, or earlier if we happen to finish earlier. So I'm really grateful to you all for being a part of this. I'll tell you, I am a veteran of pastoral transitions, some of which I chose for myself, some of which I didn't. And quite frankly, I'm living a transition right now. I've been the director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership since November 1st, and a little bit of part-time before that. But so a lot of this is coming from that background of pastoral transition space, and also some experience in organizational change and leadership. That's what my doctorate's in the corporate world. And so hopefully you'll glean some things today. This is really meant for pastors who are going to be transitioning in the coming weeks and months, and also for communities that are preparing to welcome pastors. So I'm excited, and we are going to dive right into our content for the day. And so we've got some slides that are going to pop up here. And so let me tell you that where we're going to start is with this understanding that anytime we experience a transition, there are resources that are required to make that transition happen. And so a lot of what we're going to focus on today is how do we get to what author Michael Watkins will call the break-even point. This is a graph that's found in a really excellent resource called The First 90 Days. It's from Harvard Business Review publications. And again, the author's name is Michael Watkins. And what he will argue is that in any kind of professional transition, you have a primary goal of trying to get to this break-even point where you are producing more value than you are consuming. Now, I don't know about you, but when you think about what it takes to move, goodness, the amount of financial resources, the amount of time and energy, even the amount of people resources to move someone is a lot. And that moving isn't just about the week when you move. It's the lead up to that moving week. It's during that time, and it's the time that follows. And so a lot of what we want to think about is how do we position ourselves and posture ourselves to best be ready for that move, whether we're the pastor who's moving or the congregation who's welcoming that pastor. And then how do we get through that space to be able to be productive together? So that's really what we're going to focus on today. And so, in order to do this, we can't just be thinking about the move when it happens. We need to be talking a little bit about the pre-move experience. Your transition into a new setting begins long before you arrive there. And so, what I want to imagine to begin here is what does it look like to leave well? Again, if you're a pastor or if you're a part of a congregation. So let me just offer three quick tips for leaving well. As I prepare to offer these, I do want to commend there is a resource that the Lewis Center produced a number of years ago before I was the director called The Right Start. It's a video toolkit. It's available for purchase at churchleadership.com. And there's a lot of information there that was designed by Lovett Weems, who's the founder of the Lewis Center, and specifically his content about leaving well is really worthwhile. And a couple of the pieces I'm going to offer pulled pretty directly from Lovett. A couple are from me. me, but I would just commend that to you if you want more information about this or ministry transitions in general. So the first thing I would say is that for both the pastor and the congregation, you need to give yourself room to let go. One of the things that I've found to be really valuable, I am a United Methodist, and in the United Methodist Book of Worship, there is a liturgy that is offered usually on a pastor's last Sunday that's called a liturgy of farewell or a liturgy of pastoral transition. And I think this is so powerful, not just because in worship you just sort of say goodbye to one another. The language in this is really a lot of the motivation and the goal for what can happen in a time of pastoral transition and what you're looking to do as you leave well. I'm going to read just a couple of sentences of this to you because I think this is really, really helpful. So it says this uh, I accept your gratitude and forgiveness, and I forgive you. Trusting that our time together and our parting are pleasing to God, I release you from turning to me and depending on me. And I encourage you, your continuing ministry here, and will pray for you and for your new pastor. I think, listen to what's in those words, that word release. A lot of moving on from a ministry setting and recognizing some of us are going to be moving from church to church. Some of us may be moving from a different workplace into a church. Some may be moving from a seminary or a place of study into a church. Wherever you're moving from, there's a need to be able to let go in order to arrive well. Releasing yourself from the accountability and the responsibility of being somebody else's pastor or whatever your role was in that workplace is a huge part of transitioning well. Likewise, for a congregation, being able to release yourself from that pastor's wisdom and guidance, that's hard sometimes because clergy may have been a part of that church for a year or several years or decades, and you've trusted that person as your pastor for some time. But being able to use that word release as a mindset and being able to let go of that space is really, really helpful. Uh, Being able to reset the relational component as a part of that. Again, for clergy, many people have looked to you for in their times of greatest need, in a time where they've needed a trusted advisor, maybe even a friend. And so being able to have conversations, especially with people who you've grown particularly close to be able to say, hey, can we kind of in my generation, we would say, have a DTR, define the relationship kind of conversation and say, hey, as I'm moving on from being your pastor, that doesn't mean that we can't, that we have to be totally disconnected or that we can't be in some kind of relationship moving forward. But we want to establish some clear boundaries around what kind of relationship that is, because no longer are you that person's pastor. And you want to be careful about the sort of level of connection and friendship that you would have with somebody such that you would not interfere with somebody else's ministry that's coming into that space. So that's something to think a lot about. Again, same for the congregation as you're preparing to say farewell to that pastor. How might you have intentional conversation in your leadership team or with folks who are in sort of different positions in the life of the church to encourage that kind of behavior and that kind of conversation? Really being able to maintain a space, at least publicly, of value neutrality. And what I mean by that is that you certainly don't want to drag anybody down publicly. You don't want to say, hey, even if you had a rough experience, it's not necessarily a great idea as you're leaving to say, well, hey, here, let me air my grievances about my time in this place. Likewise, you don't want to become so overflowingly positive that it's impossible for somebody to disassociate from you. So thinking about, especially for clergy in this space, don't let your failures become your baggage, and don't let your successes go to your. These are some concepts that I think can be really, really helpful. Specifically, just very quickly, think about also the relationship between the outgoing pastor and the incoming pastor. As you're transitioning pastors, a thing to be able to think about is what would it look like to set up 1 to 2 conversations where you can focus on things that you think that person needs to know in order to be successful. Now, again, probably not the best idea for this to be an airing of grievances or let me tell you everything that is wrong about this place, but really focusing on positives. What brought you joy about serving here? Uh, if there are any red flags that you are confident that that person needs to know about because it would inhibit their ministry, be able to speak to those factually as opposed to just sort of opining about somebody's somebody's personality or situation or anything like that. And the last thing is maybe consider doing a shared video or interview. This is something that congregational leaders can help to inspire and to facilitate. A shared video or interview that can really emphasize this passing of the mantle and the idea that the two of you, both the outgoing pastor and the incoming pastor, are in relationship in some capacity, something that can be lighthearted, maybe has humor involved, but mostly is about encouraging one another, that each person is vouching for the other and is encouraging the congregation in this time and space of transition. These are just some ideas about how you can best utilize your exit from a congregation or a space like this to be able to think about how you are then preparing well for where you're going to start as you follow. So let's pivot to that. Let's talk about you're getting ready. You know that you're moving. If you're depending on your denomination, maybe you've been informed that you're moving, or maybe you've accepted a call to a new congregation. So in the weeks preceding your move, there are a couple of strategies that are important to take on so that you can arrive well. The first is to consider having a pre-move retreat. Now, here's the deal. Let's be really real here. Some of us may be less able to do something where you go away to some faraway place in a cabin and just kind of are isolated by yourself. What my hope is a retreat is simply taking time away from your current location in a set apart space to have dedicated time for some form of activity. So this could be extravagant. You could get an Airbnb out in some country on the other side of the world, or it could be just simply finding space at your local library. It could be finding space in a local coffee shop or something like that, where you're really just dedicating, again, 2 to 3 days to thinking about where it is you're headed. And this specifically is for clergy in transition. A couple of things that you want to think about during that time of retreat. The first is some space for inward reflection. So much of ministry is relational, but we can't neglect the relationship with God that we have and how that influences and inspires every bit of ministry that we are going to engage. So take some time to consider where is your relationship with God and how do you hope to embody practices in that relationship that can be a part of your ministry moving forward. Maybe there are practices that you've been engaging in your previous location that you say, hey, I really need to carry these with me. Or maybe there's some things where you say, hey, that just isn't really working the same way that it was before, and I need to adapt or think through this differently. Set some goals for yourself, set some ideas of what that can look like, and be sure to be attentive to this because this is one of the easiest relationships to let slip away if you're not careful in a time of transition. Another thing to be able to do as you step into this time of retreat is to visualize a plan. In other words, think about your first maybe 90 days, 6 months, whatever it may be that you want to be able to give some concrete time to. And what does your life look like and what does the congregation look like at the end of that time? So if you say 90 days in, you want to have an entirely new building, 8 new worship services, and 20 new staff people might challenge you a little bit to think about, is that feasible? Is that realistic? Uh, be able to think with a sense of reality and a sense of optimism about what does this look like and how can we start preparing in this time to make that a reality. One of the ways we do that is thinking about calendar. How are you beginning to shape your personal calendar and the calendared life of the church to think about, okay, well, what are some of the ways that we need to schedule our time, schedule activity to get to that place? For example, you might think about, hey, is there a time for like a fall kickoff that I need to start navigating towards, or is there a time that I need to be planning for when I'm going to be meeting with my leadership team, or that sort of thing? Being able to go ahead and schedule and identify some of those pieces is really, really important. Another piece for clergy is think about your preaching. I know for me, I'm a series preacher, so I would want to think in sort of blocks of time about some different themes and scriptures that are really important that I may want to illuminate on. If you have time in that retreat space, use that as a time to navigate some of that. Because here's the thing, preaching and preparation for preaching takes a lot of time. And so if you're able to give yourself some of that time ahead of time, sorry, I'm using the word time a lot. If you gave yourself a little bit of that ahead of time, what you're doing is you're doing your future self a favor to be able to afford more time to be in relationship and community with people while also making sure that you've prepared excellent messages that are able to then translate to the context in which you're serving. Now, an important caveat to this, I would not go much further than 6 months out in planning because you're just going to be getting to know that community and that context that you're going to be serving in. So you don't want to assume the context, you want to know the context. If you've planned too far out in preaching, you may end up inferring some things upon that community or that context that may or may not be true. And you want the preaching that you're offering and the leadership you're offering to be true to the setting that you're finding yourself within. So do think about how you're planning for preaching, but be careful not to go too far out on that. The other piece related to that pre-move retreat is be thinking about where are the points of connection that you can be making with community leadership. I think this is so important because your congregational leadership, those opportunities are going to come about a little bit more naturally. You're going to find yourself in the church building. You're going to be in worship services. You're going to be connecting with people from the church. At least I certainly hope so. But you'll find that you have to be intrinsically motivated to really pursue those more external sort of spaces. So think about civic leadership. In other words, like mayors, members of city council, support services. These are sheriffs, fire, EMT personnel. Think about school leadership. I know one of my appointments, our church was directly across the street from a 2,500 student high school. It was really important to me to think about what kind of relationship I was going to build with the principal of that school, with the guidance counselors, with the PTA. Think about activism organizations, advocacy organizations, folks who are working on hunger issues, justice issues, working alongside the marginalized, and then also key business leaders in things like the Rotary or other similar foundations or organizations in a community that bring leaders together. The reason you want to think about this is that a lot of those connections beget other connections. And the more you're able to live in a connected sort of leadership environment, the more you're introducing your congregation as a trusted partner of the community and you're finding support for yourself as a leader. Now, I don't know that it's appropriate to try and develop a Rolodex of 20 or 25 names in this pre-move retreat, but what might be helpful is to think about, are there 2 to 3 people that you would prioritize meeting in your first week in your new appointment or your new congregational setting? And then taking the time to go ahead and reach out to those people or their administrators to be able to set appointments to make that happen that first week. If you wait until you've arrived somewhere, say, hey, I want to call the mayor on day one and see if I can just drop in her office. Well, maybe that could work, but you're likely to have a little bit more success if you can do some work ahead of time to get into that space and to plan out in advance. There are other things that that retreat can be and do, but those are a few different things that I would recommend. Before we move to the next slide, let me speak briefly to congregations who are preparing to welcome a new pastor in this time of preparation. Do think about how you are going to welcome the pastor and that person's family into the life of the church. You're coming again from the United Methodist landscape. We have a group called the Staff Parish Relations Committee that often will coordinate a lot of those activities and habits. But think about how you might be preparing as that person arrives, opportunities to get to know the area. Maybe that's gift cards to local restaurants. Maybe that's helping to prepare some meals and things of that sort. Also, think about how you can be a part of facilitating some of those introductions to some of those important community leaders that can help get that pastor connected within the community and have a foothold in the neighborhood as quickly as possible. All right, so we make it through the weeks that are leading up. Hopefully, you've wrapped up well at your current setting. You're getting ready to move to a new place. So let's talk for a second about moving week. So here's the thing about moving week. You need to make sure that you don't feel like you have to be all things to all people at this time. This is true every week of the year, but especially in moving week. You are in a place where you are likely changing physical location. You may be changing residences. At a minimum, you're moving from one office to another, and that's going to take time. Remember, we talked a little bit earlier about that break-even point and the resource consumption, the value consumption that happens. This is a week where you're going to be consuming a lot of resources. You're going to be needing to take a little bit of time. You're going to be needing to take a little bit of space to do your own thing, and that's okay. You don't need to feel like you're on the clock, that you're rushing through everything. And likewise for congregations that are receiving this, this is a great time to set expectations for what that week will look like. You don't want to call on your pastor the first day and say, "Hey, we need you to," or during moving week, I should say, "we need you to attend these 8 different meetings." There's going to be time and space to meet people, to get settled, to get in the rhythm of work. This is a time where sometimes you just have some things you have to do. You only have movers for, a certain number of hours if you have them at all. You want to be able to attend to those sorts of things. And so think about how you might chunk out your day in order to schedule things well. So, for example, the way that I will often think about this is chunking the day into morning, afternoon, and evening. And these are each meant to be 4-hour chunks. Now, I know you see up on the screen afternoon is 12 to 5. I think I actually meant that to say 1 to 5 so that you build in a break somewhere in there, 12 to 4, whichever it might be. But in those 4-hour chunks, what you want to think about during moving week is that one of those should be dedicated to your professional work. So each day during moving week, if you could say, "Hey, can I block off a 4-hour chunk to maybe meet somebody, to answer a couple of phone calls or emails, to do some sort of connectional relational work." That's a great idea. One of those blocks should probably be reserved for moving based activities because goodness knows boxes don't unpack themselves, do they? You need to be able to attend to some of that to hopefully get yourself settled as quickly as you can. And one of those blocks really needs to be dedicated to family and personal time, to really make sure that you're investing in yourself and the people around you so that you don't show up in your initial time in your new setting exhausted, burnout, and like, I can't even do this anymore. So think about how you might chunk that time out. Now, something I would just advise when you're beyond moving week, these 4-hour chunks are actually kind of helpful for how you might organize your time in general. I'm a big believer that when you're working, pick two of those three blocks of time to be your working time. So if you know, for example, hey, I'm going to have a night meeting today. I've got to meet with the church trustees, let's say, or building committee. Uh, that's going to be, you're going to be working the evening block. Well, maybe you say, hey, I'm going to work the afternoon block and the evening block, and I'm going to have the morning as a set aside separate time, or I'll work the morning, but I'm going to take the afternoon space to have some set apart time. If you can have that space where you're kind of doing 2 to 3 blocks beyond moving week when you're actually in the working rhythm, that can help you make sure you're engaging in a healthy and sustainable rhythm of ministry life. All right, so we've made it through moving week. Let's talk a little bit about the pastor's first day on the job. So, for some clergy, this first day will be a Sunday. It'll be a worship day. What I'm imagining for this exercise is that your first day is during the middle of the week. Maybe it's a Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, something like that, where you're transitioning and you say, "Hey, I'm actually here. I'm on the job. I am the pastor of XYZ church." That first day is really meant to be an active relational day. If you find yourself on your first day of pastoral ministry in a setting, just behind a desk for 8 hours, I don't know that that's the right foot to get off on. You want to be thinking about how can you be engaged in active relationships. So there are a couple of things that I would advise you do to really live into this. The first is uh, think about your leadership team and the people who are part of that. In some settings, this would be called a church council, an admin board, a core leadership team, a board of elders or deacons, whatever it may be. I would encourage, if you're a pastor transitioning into a space, give a phone call to every member of that leadership team. In that phone call, you want to be able to offer gratitude, like, hey, I am so grateful to be able to be your pastor. You want to be able to communicate that you're happy to be there, even if you're not so thrilled if you're like, wait, I don't know why I've been sent into this place. This is a time to say, hey, I think there's some good that we can do together. And it's an opportunity to ask two questions. You can see those on the slide. Let me just share them with you quickly. The first is, what is your greatest hope for our shared work? Be able to have a pen or pencil or a tablet or whatever it may be close by. Write down that response because that hope is going to frame a little bit of how you can understand and know more about that community. What is your greatest hope for our shared work? And secondly, is there any way that I can pray for you or support you today? Again, you're coming to be somebody's pastor. You're there to support them spiritually. If you have a way to be able to pray with your leaders over the phone or in person, whatever it may be, that's reemphasizing your pastoral identity in that space. Another thing to think about for clergy leaders is that first day, see if, again, remember in your pre-move retreat, you were thinking about, hey, who are some of those community leaders? Hopefully, you were able to schedule some of that. So you want to be able to think, hey, am I able to meet with one or two key community leaders? Now, for congregations that are watching this video or this webinar, be thinking about, can you help to facilitate that? Maybe even would you be willing to be a third person in that conversation? Because again, this is a way of being able to shape sort of the identity of the congregation within the larger neighborhood or the larger community, and having the pastor alongside of a lay leader or a member of a leadership team can help to emphasize the role of the church in that space and what that can look like moving forward. The last note I'll make about your first day is that if you know that there is a pastoral care situation, or if there are multiple pastoral care situations, attending to one of those is a really good idea on the first day, because usually it won't be a secret that you went to visit somebody. Word gets out about that sort of thing, and it emphasizes again, remember, you're trying to get to that break-even point, that value added point. And so you're emphasizing your caring role as a pastor and being able to step into that space. And so think about, is there a critical pastoral care situation, or is there somebody who's maybe in a homebound space, or a family who's had a challenging time? This is something you want to maybe consider on that first day, because that visitation can help to reinforce your pastoral identity in a community. All right, so let's move into the first week. So you've gotten through day one. You're now in your first week. Remember, we talked earlier about the chunks of time. You do want to be able to think about what are some office hours. So again, you're pastoring a congregation, you're there for the wider community. I hope you are not in a place where you're spending 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. in your office Monday through Friday or whatever it may be. However, you do want to be able to think about, are there a handful of hours where I can say, hey, you're welcome to drop in. I will be at the church, or I'll be available to be able to meet with folks. I would recommend thinking about a period, a total of maybe 6 hours in your first week. You could break this down one of two ways: either having two open office hours for 3 days, we're having three open office hours for 2 days. I know that's threes and twos getting mixed together, but however you would best be oriented, or however your time would best be spent, be able to think through how you're making yourself available for folks to drop in. Likewise, for congregations, I hope you're thinking about, how might we be intentional about showing up to say hello, to introduce ourselves, and to offer maybe some perspective on what is the best of the community that we can offer to help this pastor feel oriented and settled in this space. That first week is a time where you want to think a lot about your preaching and how you're able to get to a space of that first sermon. You want that to be really a place of optimism, a place of really getting into the rhythm of what you're trying to do. And so that first sermon, it's a real opportunity to introduce yourself, to do some great work, but also to proclaim the gospel, and to understand that you're going to be able to offer some great things to that congregation. And then the last piece of that first week is take a day off. Sabbath time is essential, and you need to be able to model that, because if you're showing early on, hey, I don't need rest, I don't need much of this, then people are going to start to expect, well, this person just works 24/7. You need to be able to model and say, hey, I'm going to work as hard as I can when I'm here, but when I'm off, and so find that time for Sabbath. All right, I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here and move into the first 90 days. So, this is a tip. This actually comes from a colleague of mine, Celeste Eubanks, who is the director of the Candler Center for Christian Leadership at Candler School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia. And so, one of the things that she'll talk about is onboarding. Onboarding can be great for clergy and for congregations because it equips congregations receiving a new pastor with a deep understanding of who that person is, both in their leadership and their pastoral identity. And it allows the pastor to understand a little bit more about church culture, aspirations, and the challenges that they're inheriting. And so, for those of you who are United Methodists specifically, this is something you can request freely through your district superintendent. If you're not United Methodist or if you have questions about the process, I would encourage you to contact Celeste. Her information is right there on the screen. Again, these slides will be shared after the fact, so you'll be able to check in that way if you'd like to send her an email. One of the most important things you can be setting up as a pastor and as a congregation in this time of transition is something that I would call a listening tour. Now, ideally, this is something that's beginning to be set up before the new pastor arrives, in order to really make sure that this can happen within the first 90 days. But what you're doing in a listening tour is you're gathering congregants in small groups. So these gatherings should have no more than 14 people. Let me explain who all is going to be a part of this. No more than 14 people, including the pastor, a member of the church leadership team to take notes, and then up to 12 congregants. Now, there is also a critical mass needed. If there are going to be fewer than 5 people in attendance, I would recommend that you reschedule that listening tour stop, if you will, because it can be kind of challenging to have the nature of conversation that you need to have in that space. And depending on the size of your congregation, that's going to dictate how many of these stops you're going to have. So if you're a congregation of maybe 40 people, let's say, you don't need to schedule 10 different listening tour stops. You may have two or three. Uh, if you're a congregation of 500 people, you may want to have 10 to 12 of these listening tour stops to make sure that the pastor can hear from as much of a cross section of the community as possible. And you can scale however you need to from there. One important note is that as you're preparing for this work, these are things that should happen outside of the church building, if at all possible. And home is a really, really great place. So if you have people who are scattered in different parts of the neighborhood surrounding your church or the community surrounding your church, think about hosting in different homes around the area. If it can't be in a home, somewhere private where people can talk openly is really important. And there are three big questions that you're going to be asking as a part of this listening tour. Three things that you're going to identify in the time that you're spending with people at each of these stops. And those are what brought you here, what keeps you here, and what's next for here. These three questions are meant to offer you some particular insights into the congregation that you're going to be serving. And each question has its own sort of responsibility for that. So I want to talk through just a little bit of why you're asking these three questions. So what brought you here? This is going to tell you the story of why people came to this church for in the first place. In addition to giving you that why, it's going to tell you potentially, is there an era when you start looking at all the data that comes together? Is there an era where the church had particular strength? Is there a ministry that has been particularly welcoming to people within the congregation? And is there anything happening within the life of the church that you notice isn't mentioned at all? And maybe being able to say, so what is the role of that in the current iteration of the life of the church? So think about what brought you here. The next is what keeps you here. So this is going to tell the story of the present ministry and mission of the church and what people value right now. What this can also share is a little bit of information about where engagement is. So people who are showing up, what matters to them. Again, if there's something that is going on in your congregation that isn't getting mentioned in the brought or keep space, it gives you some leverage both as a clergy person and congregational leadership team to say, wait, why are we doing that? If it's not recruiting people in, if it's not sustaining folks, if it's not giving us life, why are we doing that? And then this is also a thing to be able to think about where you might be finding opportunities to lean into broader community connection. the information you get from that keep space might be a way of putting your foot out, getting your space out a little bit more into the wider community of the church. And then the last one, what's next for here? The next space is really this can be the grounding for future visioning for the life of the church. Uh, and beyond that, it's going to tell you some things too. So uh, I think the picture that I would offer you is that you're going to find one of three scenarios of what's next for here. You're going to find either you've got a congregation that's looking for stability. In other words, hey, we feel good about how things are. We're not looking for much to change. You might find a congregation that's saying, well, we like our structure, we like how we're built, but we might want some modifications within that structure, maybe some new programs or some new ways of doing things. This might be called a renovation. If you think about from the perspective of the house, stability, you're there just to maintain and to keep the house going as it is. Renovation, you might be changing the paint color, you might be putting new carpets in or something like that, but you're not doing an overhaul necessarily. If you hear in that next that things are needed that are going to be a wholesale change for the life of the church, you're going to be changing structure, you've got a different missional identity, a brand new vision, that might be called a rehabilitation. Again, thinking about house, tearing it down to the studs, right? Where you're really reframing the entire identity of a congregation. The listening tour can give you some insight as to what the congregational expectations might be for this sort of thing and maybe where you're going to be leaning in. Uh, the other thing I would say is, does that align with anything you've been told by judicatory leadership? You just want to make sure there's alignment between what the congregation thinks, what the judicatory thinks, and what you think as a clergy leadership. And then the other couple of pieces about that next question, you're going to find out is the future motivated mostly by internal growth or external growth? In other words, hey, can we get more people in our building? Can we amass more resources for ourselves, more financial stability, that sort of thing? Or uh, are we motivated by transforming the neighborhood that we're in? Those two don't have to be mutually exclusive, but it can tell you a little bit of a story about where the mindset of your congregation is. If you are seeing a lot of like, well, we just need more members, more young people, more money, that's something just to it's a data point to observe and something to maybe be wary of. You are hoping for depth internally and expansion externally. And then where's their alignment with your strengths and discernment? What's ahead? Let's talk a little bit about beyond the listening tour. There's also a concept that I'd like to give you called a community tour. So remember, we talked earlier about the different sort of stakeholder groups within a community that can be a part of informing your leadership. So this is a space to think about, are there one-to-one conversations that you can have with some of those different leadership pockets to ask some questions? I'm not going to read each of these questions to you. I know we're running tight on time, so I want to make sure we have time for Q&A at the end. But I would encourage you to look through these questions and be thinking about how might you use these semi-structured interviews as an opportunity to learn some things about the reputation of the congregation in the wider community. For congregational leaders who are watching this webinar, be thinking about how you're facilitating your clergy person being in those conversations. And then how are you preparing the congregation to receive the feedback that comes from those conversations? Because you're going to learn some things through this. Some of it's going to be really positive, and some of it may challenge your congregational identity. And so you want to be able to have the congregation not in a place of, crossed arms, like, what's this new person going to have to say? But rather, how can we encourage an openness to receive data and perspective that can be a part of shaping the future of our church in positive and wholesome directions? The next slide is going to have some of those people again. I would just commend that to you to look at later and think about how you might be engaging those one-to-one conversations to learn more about their perspective and how you might apply this. So then you're going to need to be able to present the data of what you're talking through and what you're walking through here. So just a tiny bit of idea of how you do this. Hopefully you've got that person who served as a note taker in the conversations, whether that was you in the one-to-one conversations with community leaders or a church leader who was there to take notes as a part of that listening tour internal to the congregation. You just want to be able to look at those and say, where are there themes and sub-themes that are coming up? So let's take that next question of you hear this story of you're hearing a lot of folks who are concerned with we need more young people. Okay, so that becomes a theme. And you see a theme coming from the first question, what brought you here? Maybe there was a program or something for young families that brought folks in. So being able to think through, okay, is there a connection there about maybe that means we need to focus on ministry with young people and how that might work. Again, thinking through where are there common responses that you're able to respond to from each of those questions. And you want to be able to present those findings to your leadership team. As a pastor and leadership folks, you need to be ready to receive these. And you want to ask a couple of questions. So, what are we finding? What does this mean for our shared leadership? And how might we share this information with the congregation? Now, I am a huge proponent of you don't want to necessarily present findings of data as a part of a worship service. It's a little bit odd to offer sort of a fact-driven sort of presentation and then start singing "Be Thou My Vision" or something like that. Not that you can't do that, but I would recommend thinking about a town hall. So, could you gather your congregation together for a meal, maybe a lunch after church or a weeknight dinner or something like that? Where folks can share a table together and then be able to receive information. And what we're going to do with that. That's where the pastor and the congregational leadership are working together to say, hey, we've got all this information. How can that shape where we want to be in the future? The next thing about those first 90 days is you want to be able to be relational. So this isn't just about research. It's not just about trying to get a bunch of information. These first 90 days are a chance for you to really invest in relationship. You want to think about the relational rhythm in those first 90 days. And there are four different categories that I think you want to be attentive to. First, congregational relationships. This may be a no-brainer, but you want to be able to show that you are people's pastor. And so, how are you visiting in homes, visiting in community, being able to ask questions at the end of worship services? You're kind of walking through the handshake line, being able to find spaces to connect with your congregation and enforce that pastoral congregant kind of relationship. The next layer is for staff and key volunteers. So some of you on this webinar will go to churches that have paid staff. Others, you may be the only person who's paid or unpaid in the life of the church, and you have key volunteers. Hopefully, every church has key volunteers of some form. How are you investing in those people and doing the work of leadership development and leadership recruitment in that space to be thinking about, hey, who can be a part of our leadership team, help us to lead forward? And how are you pouring into those people? Because those are the people who will be a great support to your ministry and the work that you're doing. Those community relationships, again, I've given you a lot of those stakeholder kind of folks, but think about how you're just active in community. If you happen to have kids, what does it look like to be a part of a school PTA, a parent teacher association, to be involved in other civic leadership, to be involved in advocacy leadership, and to build those community relationships in a way that presents yourself as, hey, I'm not floating above this community, but I'm invested and immersed within the community. And last but absolutely and certainly not least, those familial and friend relationships. You are a human being. You are not a robot. You are not some sort of I don't know what we could describe it as. You're a human being and you need your own space of relationship and rest. I will make a confession here. I'm more of an extrovert. I like being around people. Sometimes those relationships are also self relationships where you say, hey, I need a pause. I mean, maybe you're more introverted, or you just say, hey, I need a minute. That's okay. Finding spaces to connect with. If you have a spouse, if you have children, that's important. Connect with your friend groups. Find ways to be able to be engaged in conversation and connection with friends. Finding ways to develop those collegial relationships. Hopefully, there is an interfaith sort of clergy alliance sort of thing in your community, or if your denomination or judicatory has opportunities to connect with colleagues. Being in those relational spaces, I believe that the relational economy is the strongest economy through which a church works. And so you want to be investing heavily in that. And so my hope is that if you're able to follow these strategies, I know this is a lot, I've gone pretty quickly and this time has gone fast. Hope is that when you get to that 91st day, you've reached the break-even point. It's not a guarantee, but these are strategies that really can ensure that you are more likely by that 91st day in a new community to be adding value more than you are consuming value. And that's the goal for pastors. I hope that's the goal for congregations, is that you're finding ways to live in partnership and community to bring out the best of one another and ultimately to share the good news of God's love with as many people as you can. So that's the content that I have for today. I think my colleague Matt is going to not come on screen, but his voice is going to show up. And Matt, you're going to ask some questions that are coming up in the chat.
Yes, Dr. Page. Actually, we have received several questions from our attendees. Let's start with, why did you say statements like, we need to grow and need more families are statements to be wary of? Can you please expand on that?
So if those are, maybe the clarifying point is if those are held in isolation, in other words, those are the only kinds of growth that you're hearing, that's where you might want to be wary. Of course, it's great to have families, it's great to have young people, it's great to have more people. But a lot of times, one of my experiences is that churches often measure, they look at these kind of numbers as signs of vitality when really they're signs of sustainability. Most churches are concerned with, hey, do we have the resources? Do we have the ability to make it to the next generation and to continue to pass our legacy down? And that's not a bad thing. That's not something to be afraid of. But if that's the only goal of a church, then really what you're trying to do is a membership recruitment drive. You're not necessarily thinking about how are you out and engaged in your community to be an agent of transformation for your neighborhood and surrounding community of the church. And so that to me is the part that I would really want to lean in on is how are you seeing a mix of internal growth and external growth? In other words, and this goes the other way too. If the only thing that folks are motivated by in the future is like, well, we need to change policy in our city around something, and there's no desire for discipleship, no desire for worship, well, that would have its own concerns too. And so you're what you're really looking for in that next space is the balance of internal growth and external growth, that internal connection and external connection. And just if you're hearing only one side of that, don't be afraid to share that back to the congregation and say, hey, it seems like we're really focused on the internal, but what about the external? And if it's the other way, it seems like we're really focused on the external. What about the internal? Because ultimately you're responsible for both.
All right, another question, and this one's about office hours. Office hours. Many people get angry if you aren't in the office. How do we set expectations?
Great question. I think early on, part of your responsibility and part of what you can do early is say you are there to be the pastor. Not only you're the pastor of that church, but that church is embedded within a larger community. One thing that I've noticed over the years. So here in the DMV area, we have a bank called Navy Federal Credit Union, and they have a tagline. They're on TV a lot in ads, and the end of their ads has the same tagline every time, and it says this: our members are our mission. The church is not Navy Federal Credit Union. Your members are a part of your mission, but they are not the whole of your mission. And so, oftentimes, one of the phrases that I would find myself saying when I was serving the local church is that the greatest barrier to me being in ministry is this piece of wood that I sit behind. When I'm behind my desk, when I'm just focused all on sort of the internal work of the church, being able to think through, okay, well, what is that impacting how the rest of the community is able to see the church? It's not that, again, it's not a sin to be in your office. It's just a problem if that's the only place you find yourself. And so that's why I offer that idea of being able to say, hey, this doesn't, by the way, if you are not in the office 24/7, that doesn't mean folks wouldn't have a way to be in touch with you. I would consider giving your cell phone number out. One small strategy to think about if you say, hey, I'm not really comfortable with people having my cell phone number. There are services, I believe Google Voice is one of them, where you would be able to have an alternative number that you can give people that still comes into your phone, but you're not giving them your direct number. I don't. I'm realizing that's a very techie sort of thing. I don't know the full ins and outs of that, but you could probably learn more information about it. Uh, the key is you want to make sure you offer availability and access without saying, like, I'm going to be in this one location all the time, because then you're restricting your ability to really be a pastor of a community. If the primary mission of the community of the church is the wider community, the good news is we have very few regional churches anymore. So most of our church members are within that community, so you're able to serve both populations.
Another question. We're told not to, quote, move the furniture, end quote. Is there any type of change that is recommended in the first few months?
Yeah, you have there's this is a something I might call opportunity cost. So you have a unique opportunity in your first few months in a church to you're in the honeymoon period and you can make change, but you want to do it in a way that is attentive to the scale of where you are. So here's what I mean. So a congregation that I served had chairs in their sanctuary, and I remember my first visit there. I thought, oh, chairs in the sanctuary means uh, we can do some different configurations. They're not pews that are locked down. And then about 3 weeks before I arrived, I had a call from a mentor who had previously served that church. And I picked up the phone and he said, Jonathan, I've got one piece of advice for you. And I said, great, what is it? He said, don't move the chairs. And I realized it, and then that caused me to ask a member of the congregational leadership team, hey, why did he say I shouldn't move the chairs? And they were like, oh, don't move the chairs. So if there are any sort of iconic things like that in the church that you would maybe there's a backstory there or something that you don't yet know. This is where the partnership between a pastor and congregational leadership teams is essential. Because as a pastor, you can come into that leadership team, maybe not to the whole team, maybe even just to like a council chair or somebody, and say, hey, I was thinking we might want to X, Y, or Z. And you can get some feedback on, hey, has somebody tried that before? Is there any reason not to? But if you don't do any form of change in your first 90 to 180 days, you're reinforcing the idea that your role there is to stabilize and that you're just going to sort of maintain what has been. And so it can be somewhat jarring then if a year in you're all of a sudden like, well, I want to change these 4 or 5 different things all at once. So think about, is there incremental small change? A way of phrasing this is, can you find an early win? So something that you say, hey, this isn't going to require a lot of relational capital, maybe not a lot of physical capital, that would allow you to say, hey, I am new here and we are going to do this a little bit differently, but something that would be smaller in scale that can then open the door for larger scale change further down the line.
Thank you. Another question. What is the role of an incumbent associate pastor when a new senior pastor is arriving?
Yeah, great question. The associate pastor has such an important role in this time because that person can inadvertently become the interim senior pastor, even with a new lead pastor in place. And so I think for associates, so let me speak real quickly. If you are an associate who's listening to this webinar, the best opportunity you have is to be a conduit of leadership. What I mean by that is you are a vessel through which leadership can take place, and so being able, you're essentially facilitating the baton going from one hand to the other. That doesn't, you hold that, you're a part of that, but you're not assuming the lead pastor role. Um, because people have a larger familiarity with the associate pastor sometimes, you'll find the associate will get a call when somebody's in the hospital. The associate will get a call when somebody has a concern, that sort of thing. And so, for associates, think about how are you relaying that information to the lead pastor, and how are you making sure to appropriately identify that relationship in the conversations that you're having with the congregation. So, if somebody's coming to you and saying, "Hey, I really don't like how Jonathan's doing," X, Y, or Z, to not say, yeah, that guy is a doofus. Yeah, let's go get him. But being able to say, hey, you should take that concern directly to him because he's a grown up and he can hear it, or to be able to advise about ways to be in touch. That would be something really appropriate. for pastors and for congregations who have associates and you're preparing to think about that relationship, I would say specifically to clergy, how are you preparing to feed into that person, to seek their wisdom and to treat them as a colleague, not a subordinate? It's really, really important, and that you are both pastors in the congregation. That there are some things that the lead pastor needs to do that are that person's unique responsibility, but on the whole, most of your ministry is shared. And so, how are you publicly identifying that person as one of the phrases that I would often use in churches like, "Hey, I'm Jonathan. I'm one of the pastors here." Being able to say that and instead of reinforcing like a hierarchical approach can be really, really helpful. And also think about how you're including that person in conversation and decision making. For congregations who have associate pastors, be thinking about again, how are you including that person and how are you affirming the role that they have while not forcing them into a role that they don't have. Being able to make sure that there's guardrails there can be really, really helpful.
I have two questions that I'm going to combine into one because
Great.
they're both challenging. The first part is, what if you're moving nearby and current parishioners might follow you and leave the current congregation? And another question along with this is, what is the role of the incumbent associate pastor? Oh, I'm sorry. Speak to the dynamics of going to a congregation that has a retired clergy person in its membership.
Okay. Two fun situations. Okay, so let me take those one at a time. So if you're moving locally, you're moving from a congregation that's within driving distance of the new congregation. I think this is where those one-to-one conversations in that pre-transition period become really important. Being able to remind that person when you join a church, you're not joining a pastor, you're joining a church. And so saying, hey, this is a real opportunity for you to live into this community, to lean into this community, and to know that you have my prayerful support, but I'm no longer your pastor. And being able to say that as much as possible. Now, people have agency. You can't control if somebody shows up at the front door of your new church, and nor do you want to say, "Hey, everyone's welcome except for Bert over here, who is no longer welcome because he's a part of my former church." That might be an off-putting message. So, what you want to be able to do is you first go to the person individually and say, "Hey, I know you're a part of this community over here. I'd encourage you to give your new pastor a chance." Really, that first 12 to 18 months, you want to give that person as much of a chance as possible, that church as much of a chance as possible, because that's what you join. That's where you're a member. That's where your identity is. If that person's showing up anyways and saying, "Hey, I don't care, I'm still going to come," I think being able to have a conversation with your colleague that has followed you in that place to say, "Hey, I just need you to know this person has been showing up here. I've advised them that, hey, I would really like you to be back over there and really working with that church." If you've done what you can to be collegial in that space and to reinforce, "Hey, you joined the church, not me," at some point, people are going to people, and you can only do but so much with that. And once you get beyond that 12 to 18 to 24-month window, you're in a space where hopefully a majority of folks have sort of made their place with that change. And you're not having to deal with that as much. And there are fewer, I would have fewer concerns with people saying, "Hey, maybe something's changed in their life. Maybe they've moved or maybe, life circumstances have changed and they want some dose of familiarity." Again, I think at any time it's important to be collegial with the person who succeeded you. If you have somebody who shows up at your door, who's a part of that church, but it's less. I think it's less intimidating if that happens when you get further into your time of transition. In terms of retired clergy, first off, what a gift when you can have a retired clergy person. I think being able to have early conversation with, "Hey, what is the nature of relationship that you'd like to have here? Do you want to be a part of some of the pastoral work that we're doing here? Maybe visitation or helping to preach every so often or teach Sunday school, anything like that." Finding out about desire there and then including them as much or as little as they would prefer to. Hopefully, if you find yourself in a very, very extreme case where a pastor has retired from the church that you are now serving and is now attending that church, I think there's an appropriate place to think together alongside church leadership about how boundary setting can happen. And you, as the pastor, you don't do that by yourself. You and a lay leader, if you're a United Methodist and SPRC chair, I'd have multiple people in conversation with that retired clergy person to say, hey, how can we make sure that we're enforcing some boundaries so that people, you have been a pastor, but you are not the pastor of this church any longer. We want to make sure we're pointing to this new pastor. How can we best facilitate that together? Again, doing that conversationally and relationally. You don't need to say, hey, you're not welcome here, that you're banished or anything like that, but making sure that those boundaries are in place so that the new pastor can be as effective as possible in that role is really important.
Great. Thank you so much. We have so many more great questions I wish we could get to, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. If we weren't able to get to your question, or if you'd like to ask your question privately, please email me at mlyons@wesleyseminary.edu, and I'll pass them along to Dr. Page, and I've put this information in the chat. Thank you so much, Dr. Page, for your thorough information on pastoral transitions. I'm going to lift up a message from the chat from Eric Pone, who wrote, I could have avoided 4 years of pain and suffering if I had known all this. So, so kudos to you.
Bless you, brother.
Later today, we'll send you a podcast video recording, slides, and information about additional Lewis Center resources, including 50 ways to improve pastoral transitions, 50 ways to welcome your new pastor, and the right start, beginning ministry in a new setting. And if you'd like to learn more about church leadership strategies from the Lewis Center, please visit our website at churchleadership.com, subscribe to our Leading Ideas email and Leading Ideas Talks podcast, and check out more 50 Ways tip sheets. I will include the links in the email. Your feedback helps us build better webinars. Please complete a brief evaluation at churchleadership.com/evaluation. I've placed a link in the chat. We truly value and appreciate your thoughts. And thank you so much for attending this webinar. We are grateful for this opportunity to be with you. Again, later today, we will email you the webinar video, slides, and more. And from all of us at the Lewis Center for Church Leadership of Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for attending. We know your time is valuable, and we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. Blessings to you and all that you do.
Everyone.